Today, I'm excited to have Kris Rudeegraap on the podcast. Kris is the co-founder and CEO of Sendoso, an AI-enhanced gifting platform that helps companies engage with customers, prospects, and employees through personalized experiences. The platform is trusted by over 800 companies and has raised over $152 million in funding. Prior to Sendoso, Kris had an interesting path through sales roles at companies such as Picora and TalkDesk. And he also founded allstudentrentals.com, which later got acquired in 2009. He is also currently an angel investor and advisor to Allen AI, Loop Golf, and others. It was great to have Kris on the podcast and get his insights into what made Sendoso such a big platform, how he sees the future of Sendoso, and how he's seen continued success in Silicon Valley, and what their plan is as they go global. So with that said, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hey, Kris, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, super excited to have you on and talk about the work you guys are doing at Sendoso and your previous experiences. But, before we get into that, we always start at the beginning. So, what got you into the world of entrepreneurship and product building?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if I think about it, I was kind of always a hustler, I guess you could say. Like I was the kid that was mowing the neighbors' lawns, or when they're out of town watching their pets, selling mistletoe on the corner. I remember that because I lived close to a Christmas tree, and it was just like printing money about this time of year, actually, growing up.
Right.
So I think all those things contributed to me just liking that opportunity to make money through me, working and making my own kind of opportunities. And then I think also contributing to that was the fact that I grew up about an hour-ish north of Silicon Valley. And so I think that was close to me. Neither of my parents were nearly at all in Silicon Valley or in high tech or anything. But I think my proximity growing up and when I did grow up, that also contributed to the allure of starting a company, making it big, specifically SaaS and software-based companies, because I had seen a lot of the dot-com boom and bust, and then what came from that. And then even in college, I was exposed to a few startups, specifically an e-commerce one and a couple other software ones where I was just, wowed by the opportunity.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think for a lot of people, right, you get into this mentality and about how to build business and how to earn money from
Mm-hmm.
yourself, not
Yeah.
necessarily just get it handed it down. And I think a lot of people, who get into startups, they forget that at the end of the day, you are building a business and there's
Yep.
business fundamentals that actually apply to that. And so a lot of those principles are actually, you're able to bring it over. Right. And of course, you started from very humble beginnings, like you mentioned, as a kid with mistletoe, selling mistletoe and stuff. And but you've been across the spectrum, right? So
Yeah.
you started with all student rentals, and
Mm-hmm.
now you're working on Sendoso. So you've had quite a journey, and a lot of different businesses that you worked on
Yeah.
in different spaces, right? So I guess a big question for me is just how have you identified those problems that we're solving?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think identifying problems is critical. I think some entrepreneurs skip the problem identification and just build, nice to have, or hey, I like, golf, so I'm going to build something in the golf space.
Right.
But I think for me, a few things that come to mind. One is, you might see a problem, but then you act too fast. So my advice there is sleep on it. I think for Sendoso was 3-4 months of sleeping on it before I even acted at all. And I'm
Hmm.
talking about before I even like started to validate the problem with others, because I
Hmm.
think as an entrepreneur, a lot of times you end up being overly optimistic and have are just thinking every idea is the best in the world, and sleeping on it can really help you kind of think through, is this worth it, or were you just at happy years kind of hearing something that you wanted to hear. I think in addition to that, you want to think through like huge total addressable markets. For Sendoso, it's 100 billion plus addressable market that we're going after. So that's also critical. I think that's a bit more of like validating the problem in the market versus just, again, solving a small problem. And then I think it's, you got to think about the business model. Do you have any unfair advantages for go to market? And I think lastly, you ask yourself, like, are you passionate enough to spend the next decade on this? Because
Right.
most entrepreneurs will have to spend a long time working on this.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I guess, I'm actually curious about that because a lot of, a lot of conventional knowledge, I guess, says that, oh, when you have an idea, just go straight into the validation, right? But in this case, you're
Mhm.
saying, no, give it some time, let it simmer, let you actually think about it. And I guess, like, for you then, what do you think that, or what has been that inflection point for you where you're like, okay, I think this is the right idea. I've sat on it a long time and like, it's time to go and try actually validating it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it. When sleeping on it for a while, letting it simmer, and then going to validate it if the validation looks good, if it's a big addressable market, if you can put a business model around it, if you can checkbox all those check boxes, and then I think is it right place, right time? Is the technology that you need to use to build this readily
Mhm.
available? What's the competitive market? So it's almost building I think it's useful building a like a lightweight business plan or like a slide deck that you'd present to an investor. Even if you're not presenting it to an investor, just present it to yourself or your
Right.
co-founder, is a helpful forcing function to think through all the critical components of that business. And I think business model is one that oftentimes gets overlooked, but is super important to think through day one instead of just like, I'm going to solve this problem and then, oh, am I going to be able to make money from this?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah, especially in Silicon Valley, right? Like, a lot of people come
a
from
lot
an
of people
engineering
just get
background.
straight to building. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly, exactly. They'll go straight to building and, even before validating or or going to the business
yeah,
model if it's actually a viable business.
exactly.
But of course, I think, what's really interesting there is your background is actually from a sales point of view, right?
Hmm.
And I think that goes right into the work you're doing at Sendoso. And what's really unique there, and of course, is I think make for the best startup founders is that you were your own customer when
Exactly.
when you started thinking about Sendoso. So, how, like, I guess, you know you obviously saw the problem there, but like, what was that schism where you decided, okay, like, this is actually something I want to go on full time, instead of doing sales role, like, this is a big enough problem for me to actually solve. And then how did you go about growing that?
Yeah. So as you said, I was customer number one. So I knew that I wanted to build this for myself at the very least.
Hmm.
I also had a lot of friends in sales and marketing. So I was able to validate it with them very quickly. And then I knew what I wanted to build for myself versus what was possible. And so I think that was also helpful for me getting kind of MVP or V1 launched.
Right.
There was some good learnings though. Like I thought this was going to be a product built just for salespeople, and I quickly realized that marketers wanted to use this in a different like campaign fashion. So I think for me it was, I had the conviction and enough kind of research that I wanted to build it, and then I started building it. And then once I got it to a point where I could start showing it to people, that's where I started getting even more feedback on it.
Right, right. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. And now the platform's doing what, billions in dollars of transaction volume, with over 30,000 gift options, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned, right, it obviously had humble beginnings, but when was that moment where you realized, hey, this could be more than just a simple gifting tool?
Yeah. I mean, there was a couple of those moments. I think the first one was really we before launch, and again, given my sales background, this was helpful. I just started getting people like lining up to use it pre-launch. I think there was 10, 20 customers that were like, I'm ready to use it when you sign up. That was a good indication. As soon as launched, we had paying customers like day one. That was a really good indication of,
Right.
hey, this is going to be something successful. We quickly scaled up and got our first like $50,000 plus contract, like if within the first year on the SaaS side. So that was a huge win. So there's a lot of these milestones where it's just like, this is going to be huge. But for me, in quitting my job, I kind of, had enough of a conviction and also that kind of that entrepreneur mindset of like, what's the worst that could happen? I go back to do my old job.
Yeah.
You miss every shot you don't take. So for me, it was like, I have enough conviction here that I want to jump in full time. And
Mhm.
then, worst case scenario, it's not that worse.
Right, right, and walk me through the launch there, right? So you obviously had contacts within the industry,
Yeah.
and so you're able to have, like, I guess, a wait list, and then when you get to the
Hmm.
launch, but like, in some ways, it is a marketplace, right? Like Sendoso. So like, how do you curate that marketplace, at the beginning, and then to scale as well?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of moving components to it because we have to build out that global marketplace of all the different vendors or gift options. And so we had to luckily go to all of them and they were willing to work with us from the beginning. We also had a lot of like behind the scenes stuff that looked like the software was built, but it was really humans behind the scenes, like doing work. I
Yeah.
think a lot of startups in the early years have that. And so there's some manual stuff there where we're like, oh yeah, you can just click this and click order. And then behind the scenes, we're like quickly trying to make sure the order went into the warehouse management software or into our, actually in the very, very beginning, we would manually then go place like the order in a Shopify store manually
Okay.
before we built automation. So we had dozens of people in the very, very beginning, just like ordering from Shopify all day, 24/7, which was
Right.
kind of funny.
Right, right. And I think one of the hardest parts with both sides is like scaling both sides, right? Because you got to give
Mm-hmm.
incentives to both sides of the marketplace, but
Yeah.
it's like a chicken and the egg type situation. So I definitely know my own personal opinion. I think marketplace startups are some of the hardest startups to do. So it's really,
Yeah.
really
I
cool to see
think
the way you guys address that.
100%. And luckily we were like marketplace-esque because we were also able to sell a SaaS license to use the marketplace, which was
Mhm.
nice because we were able to hedge our bets there in terms of driving revenue. We also were able to use that as kind of a stair-stepping growth instead of like, let infinite people use a platform wherever. So we were able to like handhold the marketplace. So there's a few dynamics that we had, whereas it wasn't just like, an Airbnb type of problem or an Uber type of problem where you were 100% dependent on a marketplace. I think we were
Right.
like kind of like 50% marketplace, 50% like SaaS.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Well, it makes a lot of sense. And of course, it's scaled out and it's worked out very well for you guys.
Yeah.
And recently, I know you just recently acquired Alyce,
Yep.
which is one of your base competitors, right? And so, before, without getting too much into the details, I guess, but like, what do you think made it the right time for consolidation in the space?
Yeah, so I think for us, there's economies of scale that we can benefit from and pass along to our customers because of the volume of the marketplace business. So that
Mhm.
was nice. It was also a time of tightening budgets in 22 and 23. So consolidation made it easier for us to be more, uh, bit more optimistic from the business and optimize for pricing. They also had some really interesting AI and data tech that we knew we wanted to build into our platform more. So that was helpful, and we ended up turning that into a smart send feature. And then at the end of the day, I think it was, you know, uh, most, I think, categories need to have some consolidation over the long term. And
Yeah.
given that we were the leader in the space, it made sense for us to lead that charge. And we're seeing a lot of success from that acquisition.
Yeah, I already know the moment you said AI and data tech, every investor who's listening to the podcast, their ears perked up, like, "Oh, okay,
Yeah.
nice." But that makes a lot of sense. And of course, I think in every space, I think there's
Yes.
going to be so much potential with AI and all those tools. But of course, they had a really great product as well. So I think
Yeah, they had a
it's
great
only right.
product and a lot of great data. And to that point, a lot of the great AI is built on great data. And so as we were
Mhm.
able to acquire a great customer base, a great team, but we were also able to acquire a ton of data, which went into then our models for our smart suggestion engine to suggest what's the best gift to send at the right time to the right person. And so
Yeah.
that was really helpful too.
100%. Yeah, but I mean, personalization is everything as well, right? Like, I mean, the whole point of gift giving is to get that personal touch when you are trying to close a sale or when you're trying to develop those relationships. So the more
Exactly.
personalized you can get, the better it is.
Yeah.
And beyond just the competitive acquisitions, you guys have also made the bold move of relocating from San Francisco to Phoenix now,
Yeah.
which that's a big difference from the ocean to the desert. But of
Hmm.
course, there's some very interesting stuff going on in Phoenix as well. But I guess for you guys, like, what drove this decision beyond just the cost savings of being in Phoenix?
Yeah, I mean, cost savings, tax savings was probably the number one driver.
Hmm.
We had an office there probably a year and a half into the business. It wasn't our HQ, but it was started off as a small satellite office for sales and customer service because there was some great talent coming from the universities at a really good price too.
Hmm.
And then, we wanted to be able to hire in multiple markets, which was critical for us at the time, pre-COVID, where everyone hired everywhere. But that
Yeah.
was important to us. And then I think as we scaled out, we wanted to have an office close to one of our larger fulfillment centers, which
Hmm.
we opened up in Phoenix probably 3 or 4 years ago, which is about a 200,000 square foot facility or so.
Oh wow.
And it's just not feasible to have that size of a facility like in San Francisco, obviously. So we had to find a market where we could have a warehouse and have an office close by to benefit from some synergies there too.
Right, right. And I think one of the most interesting problems there is that as you look to expand into multiple major locations, it becomes very pertinent on the founding team and just the company to
Yeah.
maintain that culture across different
Yes.
locations, right? And
Hmm.
so when you think about it from that point of view, how have you guys gone to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was and is still a lot of flying back and forth, lots of travel, trying to
Hmm.
bring in, especially the founder vibes and founder culture. Hiring the right people, I think we needed to make sure we had some strong leadership there from the beginning. We have tons of all hands, bringing the whole team together globally as well as just from the different offices. And then I think lastly is just trying to think about more of a remote first mindset instead of an office first.
Yeah.
So trying to do things that would benefit everybody regardless of where you are, than just trying to do something in an office that maybe silos some of that, either that knowledge, the enablement, the team culture. So just really thinking about that from that perspective.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense, and I think we're just at the starting point of even like hybrid remote cultures, and I think people don't
100%.
realize that there's so much opportunity with different startups and just different tools that are going to build this capability up, because
Exactly.
this is such a recent phenomenon.
Yeah,
So I think it's only going to get easier and easier, and there's going to be just more tools available to help you do that.
100%. I think it's an exciting time to see how the future of work and hybrid work will evolve.
Yeah, yeah, and alongside, of course, hybrid work and then the future work, there's, of course, we touched on this a little bit, but AI and the human connection side of things. I
Hmm.
think there's been a lot made out of AI replacing humans,
Yeah.
but I think now fundamentally people are trying to shift their opinion, where rather than focusing on making AI replace humans, how can AI help humans do more, like get more out of what they're doing, right? And I think people are starting to realize that the human connection of things isn't necessarily something you can just replace overnight, or it's going to
Hmm.
take a very, very long time, if ever, to do that, right? And so I know specifically for Sendoso, beyond the work, of course, Alyce does, you guys have also been incorporating AI with tools like
Hmm.
PunPal for gift messaging,
Exactly.
and it feels like you guys are taking more of that approach. So, like when you think about using AI, how do you think about using AI to enhance rather than replace the human connection?
Yeah, it's ironic because our value and our mission since day one was like creating better human connections, and I think AI inherently has been portrayed at times as this unhuman technology. But for us, we see it similar to what you said, which is like an enhancement. And we see ultimately AI helping our customers improve productivity so their people and the teams can do more with Sendoso, or we can create better conversions, which I think is even better, where we can use data to drive more responses from
Right.
sending out direct mail and gifting. And I think that goes back to the pun pal. Like if we can use AI to craft a better message draft, then and or save them time, that's critical. We have that smart send feature where we can go out and suggest what does Kris like and what gift, and saving that person, maybe that sales rep who would have instead spent 15 minutes looking through their LinkedIn or social feeds, even suggesting the right time, other people that maybe they haven't thought about they should gift to, or even the right delivery channel. Should we just surprise Kris at his house with this gift? Should we mail it to the office? Should we ask him through email or SMS? And so a lot of that recommendation engine, the copywriting engine, the decision engines, all of those AI just can drastically help overnight too. I think we've been around for a while. Probably 5-ish years ago, we had a data science team. We're already looking through the data, but when the LLMs and OpenAI came out, it just expedited our ability to productize these into features so much faster,
Yeah.
which has been beneficial to our customers.
Oh, 100%. And I think, just going forward in the age of AI, I think there's so much noise from a digital standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, people can make copy, people can run ads, and they can just do a
Yeah.
lot of things on digital, which is just going to make it harder and harder to stand out. So I think that's where Sendoso's place, for marketers, for sales, and just for companies trying to make those authentic experiences, is going to really stand out going forward, right? And the gifting space is just pretty fascinating because it sits at the intersection of both digital and physical, right? So how, I guess, where do you see Sendoso's place going forward in the age of AI? Because I'm very, very optimistic personally.
Yeah, I agreed. I mean, I think, like you said, like gifting is one of those channels that inherently feels more personal and more human because you're getting a tangible gift, you're unboxing it, and then all the other channels are overly saturated, as you mentioned, banner ads and emails. I think the biggest, most obvious, type of AI that I see is these like AI SDRs that are just sending you a gazillion, spammy emails,
Yeah.
and gifting and direct mail has some built-in channel fatigue prevention because of the costs. If it costed you $5, $10 an email, you probably wouldn't send that many. You'd be
Mhm.
more thoughtful, you'd be more personal, and so that's how gifting works. Is you don't have a gazillion dollars to spend, so you're more thoughtful and personalizing it. There's also that kind of psychological reciprocity baked in, that when you receive a gift and you see the time that went into sending it to you and unboxing, you feel like you need to make a response. I think that's the age of like reading an email and feeling bad about not replying is gone and dead. Similarly, it's like I don't feel bad if I see a banner ad and I don't click on it.
Yeah.
So I think some of these traditional channels are being, or these digital channels are kind of being, really just are not dead, but are just like not as, they're just not delivering the results they used to. And then I think, the last thing for us is just the core fundamental that people buy from people, and how do you create those memories? And I think gifting can do that.
100%. Yeah, I mean, we live in an attention economy, right? And every single
Exactly.
thing online is just trying to vie for your attention.
I like the
So
attention economy.
if you could,
That's a great line.
yeah, well, if you can break the mold and get out of that, that sphere, and something that's completely separated, it's just a huge advantage, right? Because you're not
Hmm.
competing with all these different factors and a bunch of algorithms that are very, very, very good at vying for your attention, and they've all reached
Exactly.
that point of being very good, I guess. um, and I think what's really interesting with the work you guys are doing, Sendoso, of course, is
Mhm.
because you guys are in the line of software and in actual warehouse operations and,
Yeah.
and sending it out. Unlike pure software company, you have your own warehouses and logistics, right? And that adds a bunch of operational complexity, especially at the beginning. But of course, gives you a pretty big advantage going forward because that's infrastructure that this isn't just commoditized online like on AWS or something. It's
Hmm.
infrastructure that actually has to build out, right? And so I'm really, really curious about that because, uh, you know, it's pretty easy nowadays to make software that scales, but very, very hard to
Yes.
do the logistics that scale for you guys. So, what unique challenges that bring at the beginning, and are there certain things you think you guys did at the beginning that paid off dividends now at this point at the scale for you guys?
Yeah, no, I mean it was hectic in the early years because our first warehouse was probably the size of your bedroom or my bedroom. It was not that big. And quickly we realized like, okay, we grew out of this. We got to move. We got to move. We got to move, because it wasn't feasible to go open up a 200,000 square foot facility in North America day one, or some of the
Mhm.
global facilities day one either. So you're right. It's a challenge in itself. But with that, the we took a lot of the best practices from e-commerce. We hired a lot of Amazon ex leaders that learned how they scaled for Amazon, but then how does that work for our unique value proposition? um,
Right.
we're different in the fact that, like unlike Amazon, who it might have, okay, we have 10,000 chapsticks left, we're down to 500, let's order another 9,000.
Yeah.
Our product catalog is all dependent on what our customers want. So we could sign up a brand new customer tomorrow that wants 20,000 orders of swag or five things. And so our warehouses are always dynamically changing, the space allotments change, so it's a really
Right.
challenging problem. But because of that, we built some really interesting order management software and some warehouse management software that's kind of behind the scenes, that does a lot of that heavy lifting with software that no one sees, but it just makes magic. So that's,
Yeah.
I think, critical. We also realized that for a lot of gifts, you might want to be using perishables, flowers, cookies, even wine, things that are trickier to warehouse at times. So along with our global warehouses, we also built thousands and thousands of local drop shippers, especially when we want to localize something like sending macaroons in Paris, or cupcakes in San Francisco. You need different
Mhm.
vendors, and you don't want to have a warehouse as the middleman for that. So that was something we've been building out years after year after year, is this global dropshipping network, which is really interesting. And then we're able to really build out a lot of processes and controls in like one facility, almost like a lab, and learn from that, and then scale it out to others. But it's been fun. It's been a unique challenge that a lot of employees really love, because it's not just like cookie cutter what they've done before, either
Yes.
at like e-commerce Amazon, because that's completely different, or just like SaaS, which is completely different. So
Right.
uh, for a lot of employees, this is like a really interesting challenge that they love.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges with that is not only setting up a warehouse, one warehouse, but setting up multiple warehouses and
Mm-hmm.
maintaining a certain de facto standard between all of them.
Yes,
Right. You don't want quality differences, because the worst warehouse is going to be what your brand is known for. Right. Like that's going to be
exactly.
the standard that you set. So you got to make sure that it scales across those different warehouses. And I guess there's so many different operational processes that you have to standardize with that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, with that, of course, you mentioned that you have global warehouses. Uh, you know, this is already a big challenge domestically when you
Yeah.
have warehouses across the country, but it's even more of an amplified challenge when you think about global, right? So, how have you guys even gone about maintaining the quality globally? When you have challenges and barriers like language and working culture and all these different things that come up.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we try to boil it down to, you're placing an order. It needs the order needs to be packed. It needs to be shipped, and
Mhm.
then we just take a step back on like, well, some of the stuff that we have in the warehouse, let's say in like the UK, might be different than in the Phoenix one, and so there's a different, localized set of products. But at the end of the day, the instructions of what need to be done to pack a box, the end software, everything like that is maintained. There's some different shipping challenges with like different carriers, different data sources we can have, but it's all feasible product challenges. It's just you can imagine in the early years there was a lot of nuances that we had to build into for the global facilities, but now once we figured it out once, it's easy to replicate as we scale across the globe.
Right, right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's so much interesting optimizations behind the curtain that people necessarily don't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
think about, because they just see, hey, they're looking at Google, they're looking at stuff that consumer facing stuff, or very high level enterprise level software. But there's so many interesting optimizations when it comes to warehouse logistics, scheduling, even just every single placement of a machine or
Yeah,
of different product within a warehouse can make such a big difference over time that people just don't think about it, except for supply chain people and logistics, which is very, very
100%. I
interesting.
mean, we had to, a couple other nuances for us. One is we include handwritten notes in boxes. So that's a challenge in itself of making sure you have the right written note matched
Yeah.
within the right gift. And how do you scale those at the same time? Because it's not just pick one item, pack it, and ship it. It's pick an item, get the right note to the right person in the box, and then ship it. So that was a really interesting nuance. And then as you mentioned, like consumers think, oh, Amazon, I can click order, I can click, buy, and then it gets to my house like next day.
Right.
And so there was a bit of retraining the business consumer to say, well, you can do that at a price, but if you are optimizing not just for price and you are optimizing for budgets and other things, like 3 days is okay to get delivered, 2 days, like sure you can do next day, but Amazon has built this like consumer mindset of like the cost is zero to ship almost.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not true.
Yeah, yeah, and you're dealing with very different customer bases, right? Like I think
Exactly.
when you're dealing with enterprise customers, that obviously brings a whole new set of problems and scale when it comes to
Hmm.
stuff they're shipping out, right? Because
Exactly.
on Amazon, I might buy one HDMI cable, and maybe like the whole of San Francisco buys, I don't know, 10,000 HDMI cables on average, maybe per week.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about enterprise businesses, they might have large campaigns where they're selling the same mug or the same three products, but over 20,000 prospects, right? So I
Exactly.
guess how. but there's still, but still a lot of those, I feel like, and you can feel free to correct me here, but I feel like a lot of customers are probably still expecting things from the consumer mindset, right? So how did you guys go about that challenge? Like when you think about Sendoso and your enterprise customers, how do you get them out of that consumer mindset and get them to think more on the business, like business side of things?
Yeah, some of it's pricing. So some of it's showcasing the different prices if you want to ship 1 day versus 3 days and that
Mm,
difference. There's also a bit of education around, hey, do you want us to do swag on demand, which price is higher, but you don't have to hold any inventory, or do you want to order 50,000 of these and we can get the price way low and you can ship them out one at a time or 1,000 at a time? So there's a bit of education on all of the different nuances. There's also education on what can fit in a box versus and not being able to see it, and like, hey, I just want these three things in this box. And so there's a good amount of like building software to educate the customer or make it easier for them to understand what they're sending, and the timing, the budget, the personalization, and some of like the constraints. Because Swag on Demand is really cool. You can say, hey, I don't have to hold any inventory. I can print this, mug with on demand. But then you're like, oh, well, pricing is a little bit higher because you're not getting the volume discount. Um, and so there's a bit of just, again, just education and productizing that education.
right, right. And I think one of the most interesting parts there as well is like, yes, all these integrations that you guys have built out, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
whether it's vendors or within the platform. And I think when you become the centralized platform for something,
Yeah.
uh figuring out which integration to build is a huge issue. I mean, of course, you can
Yeah.
get the customers to tell you, but that has its own lead time. And you might do it for one customer, but another customer wants another integration. Of course, it takes time to build each one out. But how have you guys prioritized that? Like, how have you addressed that problem of, hey, these are the integrations we're going to build out, and this is the timeline?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the very beginning, integrations was core to our value prop and the problem we were trying to solve. For me,
Mm-hmm.
it was you need to integrate this into your CRM, your marketing automation, your sales engagement tools, because you want to live where your users live. And I
Right.
think that's also critical for bringing this very offline, siloed, manual gifting and direct mail channel into more of a digital like reporting and automation. So
Yeah.
we said no matter what, integrations are core to what we do from day one. Our first integration, Salesforce, was kind of like customer demand. That was the most obvious integration. We then looked at like a 6sense integration, which was really critical because there was some really advantageous, better together stories of using intent data with gifting, and so that was a no brainer. There's like cutting edge integrations. We want to be ahead of the time. Like we launched a Clay integration.
Nice.
We know we needed to do HR integrations, but there's dozens, if not hundreds, of HRIS software now. So we're like, we don't want to do every one of them. So let's use one of those like iPass or a company called Merge, which is like build
Yep.
into their API, and they have an API into a bunch of APIs, like a unified API. So that worked for some HR integrations. And then playing into our product vision, automation is critical. So like HubSpot integration was really key, and how do we make that better? We presented on stage with HubSpot at their last inbound conference, talking about a really native integration we built. So the experience is really key. So, um, yeah, it's something that we thought about a lot. We go to market with these partners, and we always want to spend engineering time each sprint on an integrations, either making them better or new ones.
Yeah, yeah, and there's so many new, like, I think that's what's very interesting, right? You mentioned Merge. So there's
Mm-hmm.
so many new providers that are essentially consolidating these integrations to one platform, so it makes it
Yeah.
easier and easier for you to leverage that. So that's a very interesting, point there. And I think the second really big thing I saw was, like, you mentioned Clay,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just thinking about some of these sequences that marketers run and
Yeah.
something like Clay or La Growth Machine, where, like, you can have all these different diverging paths, and to have Sendoso into one of those
Yes.
could be a very, very big deal, right? When you know that, hey, maybe it's a very, very high level prospect, and maybe a gift can take us over the line. Just to have that
Exactly.
automated and it's just going on scale can enable so much for marketers. So that's very, very interesting, and I'm excited to see Sendoso's path, whether it's more internal HR or external with the marketers. But I really want to thank you, Kris, for coming onto the podcast. I know you're very busy, so I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. Uh, I only have two last questions before I
Sure.
let you go. The first one being, is there a book that you recommend us reading?
I'm currently reading Revenge of the Tipping Point right now by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm a huge Malcolm
Mhm.
Gladwell fan, so I'd say that book so far has been great. Uh, Book I recently finished, Amp It Up by Frank Slootman. I think he was most recently the CEO of Snowflake, has an awesome experience there, and is a great like CEO business management type of book, which I enjoyed.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't gotten to Outliers yet, even though I've heard a lot of people tell me to read it. So I got to
Definitely
get
read
onto
that one.
Malcolm Gladwell, but I'm sure
Yeah,
that'll be a good entry point, and I'll get to the next book you mentioned as well
yeah.
after. And then the last question I have before I let you go is just, what are the next steps for you and Sendoso? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, I think for us, there's just continued focus on AI and innovation. There's a lot more we can do there. Transforming Sendoso from what originally was, a logistics company into a data company. So I think that's the biggest focus: automation, data, AI. So you should see a lot of new, exciting announcements from us in the coming quarters with that.
Perfect. Well, thank you once again, Kris, for coming onto the podcast, and for everyone listening in, thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.